I've always stood by the console community in needing their own tournaments. Not necessarily FNCS, I have put that in a video, but I always think there should be console specific tournaments. That's why I was so happy when the Console Champions Cup was announced a few seasons ago, because it gives a really good prize pool to those console players specifically. But now, after Andilex, Destru and Laizen have won it 3 times in a row, a lot of people are asking the question, should PC players be allowed to play these console specific tournaments? I've gone down to the depths of checking out the console community's Twitter and figuring out what some of the main arguments are for and against these. I want to just discuss every kind of element that I've seen so far. If you manage to find something that is not what I've discussed in this video, leave it below in the comments and let me know. The first issue I find with this is that defining a PC player and a console player is extremely difficult to do. Let's first take a look at Andilex, Laizen and Destru's actual past performances. Let's take a look at Laizen, the best example. He is an absolute demon on console and always have been. One of my first videos was actually VOD reviewing him and Slow's win of Duo FNCS on console specifically, which was still a really cool video. He has a total of 138k on console, that may not be entirely correct, and 20k on PC. So clearly he's more of a console player, but has also earned on PC. So which category does he fall into so far? His teammate Destru is also one of the best console players out there. He's got like 79k earned on console and roughly mid-20s on PC as well. So similarly, a good console player who plays on PC too. And then we all know Andilex has over $300,000 earned and probably 21k specifically just from these 3 console cups, because it's roughly 7k each. But I can't get an exact amount because Andilex is combined, because Fortnite Tracker doesn't really work well for the console specific tournaments. So what do we classify these 3 players as? Andilex, absolutely a PC player mainly. We know him from winning Duo FNCS at the same time as him in Chapter 2 Season 2, but obviously on PC, just being basically one of the best players on PC generally. And most people would probably say Laizen and Destru are more console players, but they've also earned on PC, so what is the full classification as them? This is one of the issues I have with this, is that it's very hard just to classify what is a console player, what is a PC player, because basically, if you earn really well on console, most players will also play PC, but just come back for the console prize pools, which we'll get back into a little bit later as well. And one of the discussions I've seen regarding this is that players say, well, you could just make them choose each season between which one they wanted to play. Now, that's been done. That was done in Chapter 2, 3, and 4 when we actually had a full split FNCS. And the biggest issue was that absolutely no one cared about the console outside of the players who were playing it, of course. They went, got their easy bag, which a lot of the times was PC players who just necessarily weren't as good, moved over and got that bag on console. So it wasn't even console players doing this. So this doesn't solve the equation. This doesn't fix the problem of PC players moving over to console if you're playing them at the same time, because PC players were still going over and winning them anyway, but they just weren't all the big names like Andilex, like obviously Benji Fishy last season qualified, like Queasy, Vino, Wolfies. All of these players obviously were mainly PC players who have switched back over to consoles. So again, this doesn't really solve the issue. This just fixes the tier 1 PC players moving over. It's always going to be someone pulling over because they can get an easier prize pool essentially. And also, you got to think, if both are running at the same time, then no one's watching the console one, because most players historically have watched the PC one. So if they run at the same time, you got to choose which one you watch. Are you going to watch, for example, in Stark season, Mitro, Mongrel, and Tayson, who ended up winning that season? Very, very memorable, of course. Or did you guys watch Paddy, Jobvos, and sorry, I've forgotten the third one, win on console? Like, we know who we were watching at the time. Obviously, yes, there's a broadcast for it too, but mainly people focused on the PC side of things, and the console side didn't get its light. It didn't get the time to show. Unlike right now, where it's on a weekend where there's no overlapping tournaments, people are watching it, right? It's being talked about. Benji Fishy streaming it last season had a ton of viewers, and it brought a lot of light to this tournament, and at the same time brought a lot of the console eyes to it as well, which was great. The casual players who may not even notice this, and they only have a console, now they know that this tournament's on if they weren't that invested before. So having them separate times, in my opinion, definitely better. Now, I know, I'm sorry console people, I know a lot of my demographic and a lot of the general demographic watches videos is console players, but if all these top tier PC players move over to console to play for a weekend, you are at an advantage and they are not. They are not used to playing on this input lag in particular. A lot of them obviously will be going on to the new gen consoles, not the older ones, so there's not going to be as much input lag, but they are nowhere near used to playing on that, if they are, of course, used to playing on a high quality setup. You have been playing on it for a lot longer. If obviously you are one of these people, you have a much larger advantage in terms of being used to that equipment than they are, because they just play on it maybe for a day, maybe in round 1, maybe before they warm up on it. and then go over onto this and just start playing there. So even though it's the same even playing field in terms of equipment, you technically have an advantage. And now I know a lot of people will start going, oh yeah, but these players are coming over and they're playing on new gen console. Like, you can't have it every way. You can't have console split and have it new gen, old gen only, whichever way you want it. The PS4s originally, and obviously the Xbox Ones, I know there's been updated versions since, came out in 2013. So yes, 8-year-old technology that's relatively cheap at the time will probably not perform that well in high-level tournaments. So again, I don't want to make this a new gen versus old gen thing. We're just kind of lumping all of console together. But regardless, if you've been playing on console for a long time, I'm sorry, you are at an advantage in terms of these pro players coming over. And on that note, a lot of people I've seen say, well, they're better because they've had better practice. Yes, they are better indeed. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people are annoyed about, is that better players are moving from another system and coming over to the console system and winning. I know it's frustrating for a lot of the players who just want to get earnings, but again, it shouldn't just be about getting earnings. This is a tournament, $250,000 tournament. There has to be a level of good players in there. You can't just cut out a lot of the good players who are going to earn just because a lot of the people are upset that they aren't managing to make it and earn themselves. I love watching this tournament every single season. It's really, really good to watch, but it's because you have a list of unknown names with some known names in there too, and it truly is an even playing field. You know everyone is playing on console, so these big names do not have the advantage. The next point I've heard is that it should be for console players to get their first earnings and then move to PC. I have a harsh reality check for a lot of people. Unfortunately, that is what a job is for. As a guy who worked 3 jobs from 15 to the age of 18, at the same time working in a crab factory where I sorted crabs for what was £8 an hour at the time, which is really good if you're a 15-year-old. That sucked, but I saved a ton of money. Did I spend it on a PC? No, unfortunately I did not. But it's not Epic's job and Tournament's job to get you earnings just so you can afford a PC. I know a lot of people obviously don't have great life circumstances and a lot of host of other reasons why they can't buy a PC. I know a lot of people will not be happy with me saying that, but it's the reality of the situation. You can't just make an attempt to cut out all of the best players from a tournament so that you have the option to get a couple free $1,000. It's just not the way that competitive should work. And again, it goes back to the same issue. Laizen has managed to win money, for example, using him as a top console player, and still comes back to console and still earns more. So yeah, he may have bought a PC with that earnings, but he's still playing the console anyway. And other players then say, well, this tournament should be for players to get invested in competition. And I 100% agree. And the way it is right now, in my opinion, is the best way to do that. Go back to what I said earlier, Benjyfishy streaming last season with a ton of viewers brings so many eyes to this tournament that may have not noticed it before. Previously, how many new players were getting into FNCS on console purely because it was at the same time, right? No one was watching. It wasn't getting much publicity when it was split FNCS wise, but now tons of players are starting to get involved and interested in this. And just because it's only a 33 requirement at the top, that doesn't mean that players aren't getting interested in it. There's still the opens, still round 2, round 3 as well to get through. You still have to be a really good player to be able to make it to get earnings at the same time. That doesn't mean that new players aren't getting interested in comp. Earnings shouldn't be the only thing that make people get interested in competition. A competitive drive, a love for competition, and a love for the game competitively should be what's getting people interested in competing, not just because they can win a few $1,000s and move to PC. That's just not how it should work. You've also got to think that just giving players money in return for spending money in the game is a pretty bad business model too. And honestly, it's kind of what Fortnite used to be like with some of the older tournaments. But now that things have kind of calmed down a little bit, keeping people interested by waving money in front of their face isn't really a great model to keep people playing the game in the long term, in particular the casual community. You cater to these players for the general enjoyment of the game, not just because they can win a big sum of money potentially. You got to leave that to the players who are the best of the best. That's what's going to keep them interested. But the day-to-day enjoyment has to be because the game is grindable, not because, like I mentioned, there's a couple bucks that you may be able to move to PC from. And also, a trios tournament wouldn't be the best way to do this. If you actually just wanted to give players the best opportunity to get earnings, you would do a solo platform cup, and you'd make a contenders entry, split it obviously so that console players have their own entry, because this way the majority of players will get in. The biggest barrier to entry with most console level tournaments is the fact that you've got to get to Champions League. That's always been the issue for season after season after season. And if you look back to any of the Champions entry tournaments when they're split onto console, you see a huge drop off in players. However, it's open up to Contenders League. You see a huge amount of players entry, way more than PC, which would suggest that there's a ton of players who obviously play Arena and are stuck in Contenders, don't manage to make their way up to Champs, who are interested in competing but obviously haven't made the requirement. So if you really want to get the most players interested in competing on console, you make a solo tournament so you don't have to find teammates, because they always get the highest amount of participants, and you make it open to Contenders too. You make it platform only. That would be the way to do it, not anything to do with the Trios FNCS. And that's kind of what the FNPS is, and it's unfortunately PlayStation only, so Xbox players can't join in. However, obviously that's PlayStation sponsoring that one. It's a solo tournament, and I think it's top 100 get earnings. I'll put it right here if I'm correct or wrong, and that's a way better way of people getting interested than Trios. But there should also be good Trios tournaments to fit the same game mode that we've had all season, like the Console Champions Cup. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so good in its current format. So for this Console Champions Cup that's here, do I really mind there's PC players playing it? Not at all. It's an even playing field against all the players that are there. Everyone's playing on the same systems. And honestly, it's just a fight of who's better. It's the skill cap. And if the same teams keep winning over and over again and performing better than other teams, maybe they're just better. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot. Bye my masterclass.